Wicked Revelations.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode. It is Friday, February 6th. Happy Friday. Hope everybody has great plans for the weekend. So, a new development in the Clintons testifying before the investigative committee on Jeffrey Epstein. Apparently, she is insisting on a public hearing so that she would be questioned by both Democrats and Republicans instead of a closed door deposition that Chairman James Comer was insisting on. So that is obviously an issue that is going to be worked out. It's going to turn into a circus, obviously, if she gets a public hearing, or they both get a public hearing, because you're going to have half the time spent with Democrats, giving them softball questions and giving them the ability to defend themselves. So we're going to get into the headlines right now. Thanks again for joining me. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. All right, let's get into the news. We're going to start with the first headline from One America News. Hillary Clinton demands public hearing over closed-door deposition in House Epstein probe. PJ Media has the headline, Hillary Clinton's public hearing push raises familiar questions. It certainly does. In a twist, Hillary Clinton wants the House Oversight Committee to hold a public hearing in its probe into Jeffrey Epstein, even after she and former President Bill Clinton agreed to private depositions. Clinton insists. All right. Clinton insists a public session would clear the air and show who knew what. Now, a couple of things we have to be clear here. They already agreed to private depositions. This was after they resisted testifying at all and were held in contempt, and charges, they were going to have a vote in contempt, which would have brought formal criminal charges against the couple. Story goes on to say the decision comes after months of dodging subpoenas, raising eyebrows about why the shift now. Representative James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, set Hillary Clinton's deposition for February 26th and bills for February 27th. It took a contempt of Congress, as I just said, for the Clintons to cave or face fines or possibly even jail time. There's more to the story. Clash over transparency on X. Hillary said she and Bill tried to cooperate in good faith for months, offering sworn statements and documents, but felt they were ignored until the legal heat hit. Now, we know this is just the same old bullshit from Hillary Clinton, sternly speaking as if it were fact. The reality is one of the most damning relationships that has been uncovered with Jeffrey Epstein has been, in fact, the relationship between Hillary, Bill, and Jeffrey Epstein, specifically Bill, who several times ditched his Secret Service detail to spend time on Jeffrey Epstein's airplane and island. There are also some sort of incriminating photographs there as well. Going back to the story, Comer called into question Hillary's bravado, calling it a PR stunt after they already accepted private terms. Indeed, they did. This was to avoid the vote on contempt. The committee plans closed-door sessions with video and transcripts, which may be released later. Now, When James Comer was on Laura Ingraham, he insisted they would be released to the public. Now, PJ Media is saying that it may be released later. That, for him to even suggest that possibly he wouldn't release the transcripts, that isn't going to play well into his hands. Now we're already having some sort of glitches here, of course. Anytime I talk about Jeffrey Epstein, the Clintons, or the Communist Party of China, we have issues. Just have to check my feed here to see if it keeps hanging up. Seems to be rolling now. Anyway, back to the story. Back and forth highlights real tensions. Private talks let lawmakers dig deep without grandstanding, but public ones put everything on display like courtroom drama, where witnesses work to control the narrative. And we saw that just recently, too, with Maxine Waters grilling, really talking over yeah, we're still having problems. I think it is with OBS. Fuck. Might have to restart here. Hillary demands would put Comer in a spot. A public hearing boosts visibility, but may let her steer the story. Comer prefers private first with public version later. If no deal, the fight could drag past February depositions, turning what had been a soap opera into a media circus. Whoops, excuse me. Hillary's late push for cameras raises questions about her motives. She resisted for months, relented to pressure, and now she wants the spotlight. It is really for transparency or to flip the script? Is she playing a longer game with the Democrats who might plan on placing Trump under congressional scrutiny? All right. I'm just checking here to see if we're good or, yeah, we're still hanging up, it seems like. Let's, I'm going to have to, something else here. Yeah, it's something with the page. Weird. In any case, moving on with the story that Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton is considered the Dixie Mafia, and they have used a variety of heinous acts, behavior, schemes to forward their political careers and or lessen any scrutiny. As I speculated yesterday, I think the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie has something to do with the Clintons testifying. In other words, they folks often use the media cycle and to focus on other things, melodramatic things happening to take the spotlight off investigations and other things that might go into them. Sticking with this vein, we have the Wall Street Journal headline, "Ignore It, How the Elite Consoled Jeffrey Epstein Over His Crimes." Newly released emails show Noam Chomsky, Richard Branson, and Steve Bannon commiserated with Epstein over his legal troubles and bad press. My concern here is the relationship with Steve Bannon. Whether it was professional, whether it wasn't professional. I didn't hear anything that or see anything that would implicate Steve Bannon into child prostitution or anything like that. So I would just take him off the list, but the press keeps putting him up there because he was in communication with Jeffrey Epstein, obviously interviewed Jeffrey Epstein and the like. Noam Chomsky and Richard Branson and others have more to answer for. Even some other folks that have previously said they didn't have anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein sexually or been on his island. It turns out that they were, in fact, on the plane and on the island. Moving on from the Federalists, Democrats hate the SAVE Act because they want illegals to vote. Nothing to be disputed here. The only explanation there could be for opposing requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote is a desire to have non-citizens voting, of course. It's not a literacy test or a poll tax. It's just asking would-be voters to prove that they are citizens of the country of the election they are participating in, because currently the only thing standing between a non-citizens and a free and fair election is a small square box in the federal registration form asking applicants to attest to their penalty of perjury that they are citizens. And in a lot of applications, that box is left unchecked and is never revisited. Sometimes the registrar of voters will ask them, you're a citizen. They ask it in this fashion. You're a citizen of the United States, right? Goes on to say our democracy is so important to Democrats that they hinge it entirely on the honor system, but Democrats fight against the SAVE Act is part of a bigger effort to remake American elections in ways that permanently advantage Democrats. Of course they do. That's why we have Chuck Schumer saying the things he says. Post-millennial Chuck Schumer balks when told 71% of Dems support national voter ID, claims it's Jim Crow 2.0. What they're trying to do here is the same thing they've done in the past in the South for decades to prevent people of color from voting. That is so disingenuous. Matter of fact, if you take a poll of Black Americans, most Black Americans want voter ID because their voice as a community, and they don't really vote in a block, but they do vote more Democrat. They don't want their demographic to be watered down or diluted with people that aren't even supposed to be voting. So if all of a sudden, if the Black community decided to vote Republican, they wouldn't want that voting block diluted with people, as I mentioned, illegal aliens that aren't supposed to be voting at all. Story goes on to say Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democrat of New York, was left stunned on Thursday after learning that 71% of Democrat voters support nationwide voter ID laws, despite the data presented him showing bipartisan popularity for the GOP SAVE Act. Schumer maintained his position that voter ID is Jim Crow 2.0 and vowed to shut down the effort in the Senate, along with some other people to be mentioned later. What we have going on here is something really interesting. And the reason I say that is most people want voter ID. It is bipartisan. And what we also saw from people, I don't know if you watched The Five, but if you do watch The Five, which I suggest you do, it's a very popular show and funny. Jennifer Tarlov, the token liberal there, said that you have to show a birth certificate or a passport to vote, which is a conflation of what the SAVE Act is. That's not what it is. If you need to register, you need to show proof of citizenship, which means a passport or a birth certificate to register, which complicates the process, obviously, but for election integrity purposes is certainly adequate and well sought out. So she said that. That's wrong. I'm surprised Greg didn't call her on it. The reality is that to register, you have to prove citizenship, but to vote, you have to show an ID. More from this. Fox News, Chuck Schumer under fire after brazenly calling voter ID Jim Crow 2.0. And this is really assault on the Black community. I call it Jim Crow 2.0, and the right wing went nuts all over the internet. So he was asked, Schumer, This talk about election security has revived discussions of the SAVE Act, which you have said you oppose. He said, we know there's not widespread, the interlocutor, the person interviewing Schumer here says, we know there's not widespread election fraud. But polling does suggest that there are a new Pew Research poll that 95% of Republicans, but also 71% of Democrats like the idea. Why don't you like it? Well, he goes on to say it's Jim Crow 2.0. I called it Jim Crow 2.0, and the right wing went nuts all over the internet. That's because they know it's true. What they're trying to do here is the same thing that was done in the South for decades, preventing people of color from voting. Now, we saw this in the Federalist article. It's not a poll tax. It's not a literacy test. It's nothing of the sort. It's just saying you got to show your ID to vote. Because you're on a voter roll, and when you go into the polling place to check in, they take your name, they look for your name, you just give them the name and address, and you give it, and then they go, okay, and like they do in Connecticut, at least where I vote, they ask for an ID. You could say you don't have one, and in Connecticut, they will accept a bill of some sort, just putting your name with the address to make sure you're in the right district. That also isn't really adequate. But in any case, gladly give over my ID to prove that you were the person on the voter roll. So there are many checks and balances at the point of registration, but also at the point of polling. That's why mail-in balloting opens a door for fraud, because there's not that physical interaction where you have to prove you are who you say you are and that you match somebody on the voter roll. Goes on to say, for instance, if you're a woman who got married and changed your last name, you won't be able to show ID. That's not true. And you'll be discriminated against. If you can't find a birth certificate or a proper ID, you will be discriminated against. Again, that's not true. That's just about, basically says, who, if you are a person voting, they will, if you just got married and you bring your marriage certificate, that would suffice if you change your name. I have to check something else here, so I have to make sure it's not hanging up. I don't know. It looks like the video is hanging up. I don't know if there's something I possibly could do at this point to fix it, but that's just the way of the world. Certificate, that will suffice. Yeah. Yeah, I don't really like. Yeah, I don't really like BitChute, and it seems to be hanging up, but we're just going to roll with it, so let's move on. Then, yeah, my browser is completely freaking out, so doing all sorts of funny things. Anyway, moving on. Sorry for that little distraction. I am constantly plagued by technical difficulties. It's the ghost of the machine. I don't know who's in there. It's the CIA, the Chinese. But as I mentioned previously, anytime I talk about the CIA or the communist Chinese, I have technical issues. And it was particularly weird today was the zero. I'm going to get to it towards the end of the broadcast here. Towards the end of the broadcast, I'm going to go into this Zero Hedge article that talks about Spain banning X. And like I say constantly, there are often articles that I forward to myself that somehow get lost in the internet ether. So hard to say exactly how that happens. All right. For no further ado, PJ Media, Gutfeld destroys the Democrats' voter ID double standard, and it's glorious. The target was Democrats' favorite attack line against voter ID laws, and specifically the SAVE Act, which they have hysterically branded as Jim Crow 2.0. Gutfeld's opened by zeroing in on the left's most glaring contradiction. You got to hand it to the Democrats. You said on one hand, they think a child can handle the decision to lop off their genitals, but on the other hand, they think black people can't get a photo ID. Absolutely true. They do this all the time. They did this during COVID where they said, uh, uh, they're talking about abortion, my body, my choice, but that doesn't apply to vaccinations. Yeah, it looks like both are hanging. Both of my feeds are hanging, and there's nothing really I could do about it. Sorry, folks. Moving on, there's more, of course, from our side. The Federalist Mitch McConnell might try to smother the SAVE Act despite Trump. I don't know if it's despite Trump. Representative Brandon Gill said, I just sent a letter to Mitch McConnell asking his committee to stop stalling the SAVE Act. It's in the Senate, and it's being stalled by the majority leader. The 83-year-old majority leader's latest trip to the hospital this week for flu-like symptoms has slowed the pace even more so on whatever version of the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act the listless GOP majority believes can squeak through, but McConnell's intransigence on the bill that humbly asks for proof of U.S. citizenship to vote in U.S. elections has been felt over the nearly 300 days since the Republican-controlled House passed the measure. So it's been 300 days since the House passed the SAVE Act, and the Senate visited mostly because of the stalling of Mitch McConnell. And I do have to say, though, that first, there is a flu-like virus, cold virus going around that might have hit Mitch McConnell, the old turtlehead, and it might not be him. That might have been part of the stalling tactics, but there is something going around that I fought off successfully, but it turned into a sinus infection, and I'm just getting over it now. So it's been about a week since I missed an episode because I was sidelined with this, which is sinus infection. The cold itself, I was able to kick in a couple days. But going back to Brandon Gill, who's a representative from Texas, again, reiterating that he sent a letter to Mitch McConnell. More news from Just the News. Georgia to set reform voting system prioritize paper ballots, hand counting ahead of midterms. Georgia is on the verge of reforming its voting system to prioritize paper ballots and handout verification for touchscreen early votes following the new recommendations from a commission formed to assess the state's voting procedures in the wake of the 2020 election disputes. But this only came after the fact that Donald Trump's DOJ seized evidence from the 2020 election, and that was mostly prompted by Georgia's Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, refusing to allow the feds to scrutinize Georgia's voter rolls. The recommendations finalized by the Georgia General Assembly through legislation will likely be implemented before the 2026 midterm elections later this year. That's good news. Also from Just the News, Trump's call for federal oversight of elections intensifies clash with top Michigan officials. Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, said any attempt by the federal government to take over Michigan elections should be seen for what it is, an attempt to take away your constitutional right to vote. Now it's not going to happen on my watch. And you have to understand here, of course, is that Whitmer doesn't know what the fuck she's talking about. We're not talking about taking over the state voting in federal elections. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is scrutinizing the policies that states put in place to make sure or to increase voter integrity. There's more. Michigan Republicans, however, say Trump is right to call for an increase in federal oversight. President Trump is 100% right because Michigan voters cannot trust Jocelyn Benson, the Senate Republican leader, Eric, Nesbitt of Reporter Township said she continues to fight against transparency and accountability, refuses to remove dead people from our state's voter rolls, and is happy to let citizens to vote, non-citizens to vote in our elections. She's the worst Secretary of State in America and shouldn't be running our elections without proper checks and balances. It's despicable. And the only reason Democrats get into power and stay in power is because of cheating. So beware of the supermajority in your state, like in the state of Connecticut, constantly have issues with what's going on in in the voter eligibility and voter eligibility and transparency of the voting laws. Yeah, that didn't fix it. I'm trying to fix something as we're going along here. All right, moving on with the headlines here. Post-millennial, illegal alien charged with killing 4 in Indiana crashed, detained by ICE after entering U.S. under Biden's CBP-1 border app. The 4 victims have been identified as Eric Eicher, 50, Menno Eicher, 25, and Paul Eicher, 19, and Saman Girard, 23, of Bryant, I guess, who was a friend of the family. It's crazy. Yeah, I don't know. Now I'm getting an alert. All right, moving on, though. The Federalists, deporting illegal aliens isn't complicated. Don't let Democrats complicate it. It's useful, if unserious, for congressional Democrat leaders this week to have issued a list of demands in exchange for votes to fund the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees immigration law enforcement. The default position of Democrats is to pretend to support deporting illegal aliens while overcomplicating the process so as to render it impossible. I've been saying this all along. If you're found to be in the country illegally, you're deported. So people say, oh, it's not legal to ask people for their papers. Of course it is. If you're suspected to be in the country illegally and you're deported and you're apprehended, you have obviously the right to prove that you're here legally, but most can't, and so they're deported. There's no need to go any further than that. The due process is what it is. They're asked, prove that you're here legally. And the thing is, if you don't understand, is if you're an illegal immigrant, or you're let's just say if you're an immigrant, illegal or otherwise, or recently arrived in the country and you're not a citizen, of course, you need to have your visa with you. Of course, you need to have a green card with you if you're working. Of course, that's part of the stuff you need to carry with you. Now, you're not required to carry ID in this country if you're a citizen, but if you're not a citizen, you should carry your visa with you. But they don't have visas. They don't have green cards. They have no proof of being here legally, and so they get deported. Back to the story. Was it Chuck Schumer who said this? Federal immigration agents cannot continue to cause chaos in our cities while using taxpayer money that should be used to make life more affordable for working families. Now, this is just political semantics. Enforcing immigration law and making life more affordable for working families has nothing, one doesn't have anything to do with the other. There's more. The demands include body camera requirements, This is the demands listed among the 10 proposals. A couple aren't unreasonable, but some are certainly unreasonable. The demands include body camera requirements, for example, which the administration has already initiated, but the bulk of them are explicitly intended to prevent as many illegal alien deportations as possible, starting with the first one, which insists that ICE agents require verification that a person is not a U.S. citizen before holding them in immigration detention. Yeah, well, the fact is that's the other way around, is the person has to prove. And it has nothing to do with the U.S. citizen. It has to prove whether they're here legally or not. Agents already ask for proof of legal residency before making arrests of unknown suspects. Of course they do. Something Democrats oppose. Relatedly, another one of the demands is for ICE detention centers to require immediate access to a person's attorney. Now, the reason for this is because both ultimatums serve to reinforce Democrats' favorite method of blocking deportations, endless judicial appeals. Behind every illegal alien's judicial appeal is an army of pro bono lawyers funded by left-wing nonprofits whose sole purpose for existing is to keep as many foreigners in the U.S. as possible. We know this. It's the Maryland dad, Abrego Garcia, who had all these Democratic politicians and left-wing lawyers at his disposal. Why? The guy was an illegal alien. So he was granted asylum because he wasn't allowed, he couldn't go back to El Salvador because of why? We don't know why. That's never been proven out. There's more news today from One American News. Minnesota, Antifa member arrested, accused of calling for the murder of ICE officers, doxing pro-ICE individual. Here's a picture of this loser with the face tattoos. Oh, tough guy, huh? Tough guy. I think the guy on the right and the left are tough guys, not the guy in the middle. Guy in the middle looks like a fucking freak. And, you're Antifa, what, you're an anarchist? Anti-fascist means you're a communist. So the guy in the middle is a communist loser. That's violent. Obviously calling for this shit. Not a tough guy. Lunatic. Violent. You know how you deal with violent lunatics? There was a knife-wielding one in New York that found out. Like I said, I believe that prisons should build psychiatric wings, right? That's where you could put all the fucking insane people that commit crimes, obviously. Like they could get their medical treatment, but they could also be incarcerated. Moving on, just the news. Maryland man charged with attempted murder for alleged plot connected to OMB's Russell vote. There's more. This is a different guy. The Arlington County Police Department in Virginia announced Thursday that a Maryland man has been arrested and charged with the attempted murder in connection to an alleged plot centered on an Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vogt. The 26-year-old man, identified as Colin DeMarco, was arrested last month and is being held without bond at the Arlington County Detention Facility. He has also been charged with a criminal solicitation to commit murder, carrying a concealed weapon, and wearing a mask in public to conceal an identity. This is what folks have to understand, is that the left has gone completely berserk and violent, and they have to be stopped. Anybody who's voting for progressive policies, democratic policies, or anything that's going on in the country related to the left right now, which is spiraling into chaos because of the left's proposal and goading on postmodern subjectivists who believe they're on the right side of history when they're actually on the wrong side. I continually quote the Bible, which says God delivers them a great delusion on purpose. So this is, you question it, but it's really God's work that because They reject God and Christ, presumably. They're given a great delusion, so they believe what is wrong instead of what is right because they're evil, which we see. So they're given to this great delusion, which is whatever the seed of this delusion is being planted in their heads, that ICE is somehow doing something illicit. Donald Trump is evil. The Republicans are racist, yada, yada, yada. The incident involving Vogt occurred last August when DeMarco allegedly turned up at Vogt's Northern Virginia home wearing a surgical mask and gloves. DeMarco allegedly approached a witness while carrying a backpack and allegedly concealing a firearm. The witness told police that the man inquired about Vogt before leaving the scene. The suspect also allegedly posted online about Vogt and had online discussions appearing to solicit others to murder him days before planning to allegedly carry out the assassination himself. Goddamn fucking losers. When people start turning violent, it makes me mad. I don't like innocent people to be hurt, whether they're children or adults or anything. I didn't like Renee Good being shot, but she wasn't really innocent. And I didn't like Renee Good being killed, and I didn't like this guy, Preddy, being shot and killed, but they weren't innocent. Someone innocent is like you're sitting in your living room and you get a bullet in the back of the head. Nancy Guthrie is innocent, right? But if you want to go and confront law enforcement, I don't know. I still don't want to try to correct this issue here. PJ Media, next article. Presley waves away many questions after wealth explodes by millions. Representative Ayanna Presley, a Democrat of Massachusetts, tap danced around questions about her suddenly escalating wealth. Ever notice that many people, mostly Democrats, they enter public office as middle-class folk and they leave in the top 1%. Indeed, Presley continues to amass wealth. She has also taken a significant amount of debt. Records indicate she currently sits on roughly $9 million. Not in the hole, but she sits on a pile of roughly $9 million. Keep in mind, her congressional salary is just $174,000. But the issue is, one source of her income comes from her husband's Boston-based management consulting firm, which generated between $100,000 and $1 million in 2024. Notably, Harris founded the company in 2019, the same year Presley began her congressional career, because if you go into Congress, then you start an investing firm. My feed is locked up here. See if we can't correct it. I'm going to try something here. Might have to do with the cash. Yeah, it looked like that could have been it. I don't know if that's going to fix it, but we'll see. Also, I want to stick with the headline countdown. I keep forgetting to do this. And the funny thing is I wrote it down as a reminder, and then I ignored the reminder. Like I said, I'm not that sharp in the morning. Some will argue not that sharp any other time of day, but I would disagree with you there. The problem is, if you take magnesium, you should really take magnesium. It has all sorts of mental benefits as well as physical benefits for sleep and other things. It's really, and I had a real serious medical situation back a long time ago, and doctors couldn't figure it out, and I had to figure it out on my own. And it turned out it was lack of magnesium, because it is It is one of your electrolytes. And most people get enough potassium, and most people get enough sodium. Obviously, people get too much sodium. But they don't get enough magnesium because the main source of magnesium is mineral water. And most people don't get the right, they don't drink enough water, but also water with enough magnesium in it. So it is kind of a trace mineral that you should, get yourself somehow. I get it through specific spring water I drink, but also take supplements. But in any case, what I was getting to is I have been taking the supplements because it interferes with the absorption of my antibiotic. All right. Getting back to the health subject, but this story from AMAC, the transgender industrial complex is collapsing. In Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, one character asks another how he went bankrupt. 2 ways, he responds. This is a famous quote. Gradually and then suddenly. The quote has become a famous metaphor for slow compounding developments that culminate in a sudden collapse, like the economy. And now it applies to the transgender industrial complex that has for years insidiously preyed on vulnerable and confused children. Indeed, it has, and that is quite a shame, the fact that that has indeed happened. And no love lost here. I just don't, it seems like people have lost all sense with concerns with innocence. And it's always the evil that like to harm innocence. So without taking a pause, taking a step back and go, hold on a second, are we helping? Are we hurting? And I always accuse Democrats of this, of insisting on progression. They're progressives, insisting on progressives and progression, despite not knowing or not concerning themselves with the unforeseen consequences of their action. I'm trying to do. So bear with me. Because I'm looking at the feed and it's frozen. So along the health question is, of course, the Washington Times and this headline. Republicans call on DOJ to probe 4 blue states for refusing religious opt-out for kids' vaccines. This is story number 16. Representative Greg Steube is prodding the Justice Department to investigate 4 Democrat-led states over allegations they aren't allowing parents to use religious objections to opt out of school vaccine mandates. And indeed, the problem is the Democrats love mandates. They say they're not authoritarian, that Trump is authoritarian, but they allow for vaccine mandates. And my religious exemption from the COVID vaccine was not allowed by my company because of the prompting of the Biden administration. And I ended up losing my job. But you shouldn't be forced into doing anything you don't want to do. And that was the problem. And I had already approached HR and said, hey, look, these vaccines, they're not as effective as they say they are. And they don't prevent transmission. And by the way, I've already been infected. They didn't care. They looked at me like a deer in the headlights. Anyway, the Florida Republican is leading a group of fellow GOPers in a letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi and Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon asking for a probe of Maine, California, New York, and Connecticut, is where I reside in Connecticut. These actions by the 4 states deny parents and guardians the choice over their children's healthcare decisions and infringe upon constitutionally protected rights. And again, the Democrats constantly say, you're not protecting my rights, my constitutional rights. And they refer to violent behavior in the streets, which isn't constitutionally protected, and not basic constitutionally protected rights like worship and, of course, not wanting to have shit injected into your body. Worship and all right, moving on. Zero Hedge article. Now, I touched on this a couple days ago. It's an important article, which was the Zero Hedge article from today is stress in software begins to surface in credit. Now, if you've been following my program, 2 days ago, I mentioned the Wall Street Journal article that said AI has proven itself to be adept at writing complicated software speedily. They also said, and analyzing large amounts of data. Well, we knew it already did that, and that was just trying to soften the big discovery or the big progression here is that artificial intelligence can write speedily complicated software like Photoshop and other editing software, which are immense. If you don't know anything about editing software, whether it's Final Cut or Adobe Photoshop, they're immense programs. And now it's been discovered that AI can now do that. And so it is cutting down the software giants and the software market because now it could be easily done using AI. And what this article stresses here is that not just cuts at the stock prices of these software titans, but now it's affecting the credit that those software companies can borrow at or borrow, right? So what they're saying is let's just take, for instance, Adobe. Adobe now, the banks aren't going to lend Adobe more money for R&D and development. Well, research and development is part of R&D or expansion, because they don't see their model as being profitable now, that anybody using AI can develop software. It's a huge development. So people have to understand that indeed is going to upend the technology, the business of technology there, most of it in Silicon Valley. As I said, artificial intelligence is a bad thing. At first, it seems convenient, but then when it could do anything a human could do better and faster, nobody's going to invest in human labor. And I don't mean like labor, but even on an administrative level, we talked a lot about whether being able to code is going to be worth anything. Next up, from the National Review, did Gavin Newsom witness his mother's murder? Let's just get into the story. I'm sorry. California Governor Gavin Newsom is clearly running for president and, surprise, surprise, has a new memoir coming out. In an interview about the book, he recounted attending his mother's hastened death. It was the spring of 2002 when Gavin Newsom's mother, Tessa, dying of cancer, stunned him with a voicemail. If he wanted to see her again, she told him it would need to be before the following Thursday when she planned to end her life. So at the time, assisted suicide was not legal, and so they consider it murder. However, my speculation here is it might very well have been done in a method, as a method to control the now United States, the state of California governor. Moving along. Sorry, I'm a little confused with tech difficulties. And if you're just listening, you're probably like, why does he keep pausing? Because if you're seeing on screen, it's I had a little difficulties with the feed here. New York Times, Muslim move to assert political power in New York City. No, really? I've been saying for years I have nothing against Muslims, but Islam is political. And so when they have a margin of vote that's controllable, they will assert that to meet their community's needs, which is control at the, to their benefit and not to the benefit of Christians or others that they don't like, Jews, for instance. Zohran Mamdani's ascension to the mayor has given Muslim organizers and faith leaders the impetus to insert themselves into more formal political alliances and networks. Has nothing to do with Mamdani's ascension. They do that all over the place. It's when they have their foot in the door, so to speak, that then they all dive through. If you're a minority Muslim trying to get control of political workings of your city, you're not going to get very far. But once you get a controlling faction, then they're all in. And then you see how their policy proposals change also. I mean, look at the state of Minnesota now. They reinvented the state flag to reflect the flag of Somalia. You have to be a big political bloc to be able to do such things. And of course, commit fraud and not have it be investigated. On Thursday, a group consisting mostly of Muslim organizers and faith leaders in the Bronx voted to join the Metro Industrial Areas Foundation, one of the nation's oldest nonpartisan organizing networks. Sure, it's nonpartisan. I'm sure they'll be voting for Republicans very soon. The group's New York cohort has been at the forefront of a decades-long interfaith push for affordable housing and public safety and includes the heads of the city's most influential black churches, community centers, and synagogues. The group has also developed a cadre of organizers in Brooklyn's Queens, Manhattan, and have trained in the government accountability and community activism. Doesn't sound like Republicans to me. I don't know why it's nonpartisan. And believe you me, is that once the Muslims get in there, they're going to marginalize the influence of the black churches and the synagogues, certainly. So a quick headline here. New York Post, New York City knew about potentially deadly risks of 911 toxins, but insisted Lower Manhattan was safe in a bombshell memo. It's not bombshell. Everybody knew. I knew. First of all, they didn't want to test the air and the ground for toxic substances because the traces of thermite would have been found, which is a incendiary product used in demolition to cut steel beams, and it was everywhere, and also is toxic to some degree. The other thing is what people don't understand is that a low-yield nuclear device was used in each of the Twin Towers to help bring them down. It was about halfway through, and you could see the explosion, and it shoots debris out for half a mile. A collapsing building can't shoot debris out that far. It's not compressed air. People would think like the building's collapsing into itself and the compressed air shoots hundreds of tons of concrete out half a mile to a mile. That's impossible. So it's really the radioactivity, not to mention other deadly toxins that poison the people of New York. Most notably after the former Governor of New Jersey, Christine Whitman, said on public TV, the air is safe. And so everybody said, oh, because at the time under the Bush administration, she was the EPA director. And she said, the air is safe. And I just laughed. I said, the air is not safe. There's no way the air is safe. Knowing what I knew. But people went along with it anyway. Stupid. More news, One American News. Harris unveils headquarters 67 X account as rebranded social media effort to mobilize young Democrats before 2026 midterms. She sucks. She sucks so bad she should just go away. But the best thing for Republicans is she wants to throw her hat in the ring and stay in politics. Go ahead. She's a moron, very low IQ. She thinks she has appeal and charm. She really doesn't. She looks like a deer caught in the headlights that happens to be high and either on booze or whatever. She's like a drunk chick in a bar. That's her persona. You know, O is overly gregarious and happy. That's not O is charming. Not when you have to deal with serious issues, as politicians often do. Just the news, red flags raised over Chinese communist academics inside U.S. colleges developing advanced tech. This is a reprint of an article that I covered. Elite American colleges developing advanced technology with military applications have been infiltrated by academics who are card-carrying members of the Chinese Communist Party. Really? American Accountability Foundation reported it found nearly 24 Chinese academics working at elite U.S. schools and labs who, because of the dual-use threat of their research, close ties to the military research sector in China and or clear ties to the Chinese Communist Party, should be expelled from the United States and never readmitted. Obviously, they're the enemy. But you also have to understand that they're not just students, that they're actual Chinese researchers in the U.S. developing dangerous biological tech with Americans. And then they illicitly try to smuggle the shit out of the country. I mean, people have to understand what's going on here. The communist Chinese believe they're at war for dominance of the world with the United States. And there are plenty of leftists in the United States that are allowing them to do it. There was the same thing going on with the Soviet Union, that there were academics and far leftists that wanted the Soviet Union to prevail. Even when Stalin was still premier there, whatever they call it, the dictator. More Chinese news, New York Post. U.S. accuses China of secret nuke testing as it calls for broader arms control deal. So I can reveal that the U.S. government is aware that China has conducted nuclear explosive tests, including preparing for tests with designated yields in the hundreds of tons. Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security, Thomas DeNano, told the United Nations Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, Switzerland, Friday, China has used decoupling, a method to decrease the effectiveness of seismic monitoring to hide its activities from the world, DeNano said, noting that Beijing had conducted one such test in June 22 of 2020 as the COVID-19 pandemic forced much of the world into lockdowns. They're the enemy. They're the enemy. They're the enemy. Ideologically, economically, militarily, go on and on. So this is the article that someone was trying to hide from me today. Why is that? Zero Hedge. Spain's far-left government threatens to limit and likely ban X. Spain's Minister of Youth and Children, Sierra Rego, has declared that the far-left government under Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez intends to limit and likely ban the use of X across the entire country, marking yet another assault on free speech by European regimes desperate to control the narratives. And I have to remind you that countries that have prime minister means the first minister. And it means the first minister to whom? Well, to the king. It's only republics that have presidents that are not aligned with the British monarchy and its control, subversive control, covert control of governments around the world. It would help you to know this to understand the breadth of the conspiracy. That's why you see all prime ministers of certain nations, they all start leaning socialist all at the same time. Some international news before we close out here. Wall Street Journal, a second wave of popular anger is building in Iran. Color revolution. The heavy-handed response to protests has deepened people's hatred of the regime, and Iranians are speaking out. Color revolution is on the way. New York Times, Iran is at work on missile and nuclear sites. Satellite images show repairs at key missile sites began soon after they were hit by Israeli and U.S. strikes last year, but work at Iran's nuclear facilities has been slower. And here I'm just going to show a couple slides from the New York Times. It shows before Israeli strikes, June 4th, after Israeli strikes and U.S. strikes, June 29th, after repairs on November 11th. Indeed, that is the case. But it's weird how, like, all of a sudden the New York Times is saber rattling about Iran. I thought they wanted peace. And then One American News has the headline, U.S. State Department issues leave now order for Americans currently in Iran as they're threatening strikes. Some more international news. The Associated Press, the deputy chief of Russia's military intelligence service, was shot and wounded in Moscow. He was shot and wounded in Moscow on Friday in an attack that follows a series of assassinations of senior military officers that Russia has blamed on Ukraine. First of all, Ukraine does not have this super duper intelligence apparatus that can carry out assassinations and bombings and things like that, or special operations forces that could dive deep and explode or destroy or sabotage Russian gas pipelines. It's just ridiculous. This is all done by Western intelligence with the use of Ukrainians, not getting, they're actually people in Russia that speak Russian, probably Ukrainians, that conducted this. There wasn't some American walking around in Moscow shooting people, but it's all organized. The intelligence is from the West, and the target is picked by the West, and they train the assassins. The training is done by NATO. I mean, it's just ridiculous to think, the Ukrainians are just doing this on their own. They have the intelligence. They had picked a target. They trained for the assassination, and then they carried out. It's bullshit. So the guy was Lieutenant General Vladimir Alexeyev, and he was hospitalized after being shot several times by an unidentified assailant in an apartment building in northwestern Moscow. And we know that he didn't die because the Ukrainians are dumb and they weren't trained that well. Got to shoot people in the head, shooting people even 5 or 6 times in the torso. If you miss the vital organs, they won't die. Lastly, Mexico seeking way to send fuel to Cuba without being hit by U.S. tariffs. So that just goes to show that the Mexican government is in fact socialist and they're helping communist Cuba. Instead of helping hasten its fall. Anyway, where were we here? All right, thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, share the podcast, leave a comment, hit that notification bell. Please help spread the word. The most headlines, about 29 headlines within the hour. Most news and analysis that you'll find on the internet. And straight word of mouth, straight from the headlines. No conjecture. A little conjecture and speculation on my part. But thanks for joining me today. Remember, you're under attack psychologically and biologically. Stay hip to the trick. Join me every day, Monday through Friday. Live stream at 10 a.m. on Rumble, YouTube, other social media, X, Facebook. You can also find me Getter Mind, Substack. All right, I'll see you next week. Have a great weekend. Respect.
This is all a conspiracy. No, that is a conspiracy there.
You can't handle the truth.